I said I want to talk about gun stuff, and I do. There's a couple things. I was watching some of the stuff on your channel,
Yep.
and the first one I want to talk about is you had that interview with I forget his name, but you were talking about left gun training spaces.
Oh yeah, Blake. That's Blake.
Yeah.
hmm
And that seems like something that's been a long time coming.
It is, and it's starting to grow more and more and becoming more actually a realized thing. Blake is certified under a couple of organizations, one of which is called the Liberal Gun Club. And while I don't necessarily espouse myself to be liberal, a liberal per se in that classical sense, these groups are garnering proper certification and notice. And so, for example, the Liberal Gun Club certified trainers qualify for concealed weapon permit training in places that only used to be filled by the NRA. And so this is happening. It's growing. It's a slow trudge forward, and it's a slow trudge forward, sadly, against so much unnecessary opposition. But it is happening, and Blake and that video is an example of that. An example of the video existing at all is that we've made progress. But an example of where we still have a long way to go are the comments under that video.
I did spend some time reading through some of those.
Yep. And so hopefully we can. What I've come to learn through what I've been doing now for quite a few years is I used to think there was an ability to turn the rudder on an existing community, and I no longer believe that. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be an alternative community that really just does its own thing and ignores those haters.
I was thinking while watching your videos when you were talking about the need for advocacy for responsible gun ownership in non-traditional spaces, let's say, that more of the issue with gun culture, like I don't think I have as much of a problem with gun culture as I think that there should be more responsible gun marketing. Like I feel like the reason that gun culture has gotten to be the way that it is largely because of the marketing efforts of gun manufacturers and the NRA kind of pushing this, alpha-centric tough guy image thing that goes along with it that doesn't need to be there, I don't think.
Well, it's a funny thing because I think it's the hand feeding the mouth and vice versa, because what happens, it's not that different than we see with like social media algorithms. The thing that gets attention gets more use, and therefore they double down on the thing that gets attention because that's where the money is. And over the last couple decades, it wasn't always like this, actually, believe it or not. If you go back and look, I mean, there's always been elements of that. I will use the term hyper masculine kind of nonsense in that space, but it has gotten actually significantly worse over the last couple decades in that regard. And in some ways better recently, but over the 90s are probably the worst. Maybe the late 90s, early 2000s are when that really hit peak awful. The reason that was happening is because that's what was garnering attention and getting sales. But the problem is, as that becomes what makes the sales, then it also shapes the culture at the same time. And so that culture, I actually think we at one point had a more accepting gun community decades ago than we've had recently. Like it's getting better. Like I said, we're moving forward. But at one point, the gun culture used to be more, and this is another catchphrase, but more traditionally libertarian, which was live and let live. You do you, I do me. And it's become far more, as a whole, and of course this isn't entirely the scope, but it has drifted right more and more into more, well, quite honestly, like theocratical Christo-fascist kind of bigotry. And that marketing drew those kind of people and espoused that American ideal of this rugged individual against all odds, and then throw in the Christian strange evangelical elements that we have in the American culture, and you get a kind of toxic brew.
Yeah. And you do a lot of gun events and stuff, dude, and presumably you see that taking place. You see those little cliques kind of form at these events, right?
Well, that's the thing that's interesting, because running our events, we've really become, like I said, we're trying to build like I said earlier, I thought that we could turn the rudder and shape the community and make it go a different direction. Maybe there's some of that going on, but the reality is I'm more and more believing in the idea that we just have to form our own groups and our own community that's outside of the legacy one. And so the events that I run, which are across the country, we've got stuff in West Virginia, Utah, Idaho, had some stuff in Iowa. We're always looking for other regions. It's really become not holy. It's certainly not. It's not monolithic in terms of the types and demographics and lifestyles that are there. It's a diverse group of people. The one singular thing that we share in common, in spite of even a lot of differences, even political or ideological ones, is that it is a place where the idea of human rights are respected across the board, regardless of those differences. And so we've kind of built its own niche space. So at my events, we have people of all walks of life, but they treat each other like human beings and with respect, which is not happening in some other spaces where you'll go there and you'll be met with direct hostility, or if not met with direct hostility, so many people around you will be clearly hostile to your very existence that you don't want to be there. Like, for example, the ideology, like the stuff that's on a t-shirt or a hat, or even a cross conversation over to the side that's talking about, I'm not even exaggerating, the eradication of all trans people in the United States. You'll hear that kind of stuff at a gun match. And if you're a trans person, understandably, you wouldn't want to be there, right? So that's what we don't have at our events. We might have people that have different belief systems, but we have mutual respect. And that's one of the things that I hope we can see more of, because differences are one thing, but calling for the end of rights for other human beings or worse is wholly unacceptable in any space. And that's what we don't have at our event.
Yeah, and it helps that your events are kind of gun sport events. Mm-hmm. And in sports, it's like when Germany plays the UK in soccer, don't talk about the war. Like, just don't bring that stuff up here. It's not the place,
I agree, and that's a lot of the case. And so the other thing that's helpful in that is that if you can get people of even ideologically opposed viewpoints to be in a shared space where they're enjoying a common thing, a sport, whatever that might be, the dehumanization effects that are so common now on the internet with social media vanish, because now you're actually dealing with another human being in front of you that you're enjoying something together, even if, according to the internet, you must be dire enemies. But in person, you find out you're actually not. And I think that that's a really positive, good thing. And we need more of that, whatever that space.
What do you think are there's a lot of talk about what kind of gun legislation should happen to try and this is why I'm saying that it's a cultural thing more than, because I don't think, a lot of the laws that get put forward, you can look at and on their face say, well, that's not going to do any good. And especially, in state by state thing, kind of piecemeal approach, when somebody can just drive to the state next door and get whatever is banned in the state that they're living in and just bring it home. So, what kind of steps do you think should be happening to try and reduce guns as a problem in terms
of, guns. If you watch my channel, the guns have been used historically for many things, for many positive movements and for the survival of people who are marginalized. And it's been used for very horrible things, as we see on the news with a far too common regularity. And I think that the problem, for me at least, my opinion is that we're striking at that issue from the wrong direction. Because in this country, whether you like guns or hate guns, I don't think it's an unreasonable statement to make that it's probably going to be an impossibility to think that we're going to be a country without them. Like, we're not Australia. We're not some of these countries where that was a cursory, tiny part of the culture. The truth is, firearms have been part of the American culture and are continuing to be, actually more so than ever. The amount of homes that own a firearm is unfathomable in this country. And the ones that tend to own one own more than one. And it's just kind of baked into our DNA. Whether you like it or not, I believe that to be the truth. And so I think the idea of trying to reduce or remove these things is counterintuitive, if not worse. The problem I think that we're having is more that we're focusing on these inanimate objects and not on the things that are the reasons these horrible things are being done with them. For example, economic and social imparity and impossibility of success in life. When you talk about, like, for example, parts of town that are maybe more dangerous than others, and there's more gun crime there. The guns are going to be there regardless, is my stance, because I don't think you can remove them. The problem is that the history of like redlining and the things that have caused people to be economically disparaged, or they have no support, or they have no infrastructure, or an educational system that's completely failed them. These things manifest in ways that frequently can be violent, and the gun is one of the tools of violence for that. So, for me at least, I think a better approach to helping mitigate gun violence would be more education across the board, including firearms education, which we just spoke about with Blake, being able to provide that to communities that normally didn't get them, but also focusing on the cultural and sociological issues that plague this country regardless of guns. Because in communities that have a lot of these kind of problems, it's not hard to go one more step and see there's other problems, right? Like addiction problems, drug problems, being able to even feed themselves. And none of that's seen holistically. We're always focused on the one thing, which is obvious because guns are, when gun violence happens, it's disturbing and very easy to point at. But I think it's a symptom of a bigger problem.
It's interesting now that you mentioned that, like how it's pushed as gun violence is pushed as this, urban core issue in areas that are high crime, high drug trade. And thinking about that now in terms of like historic use, those drug runners having guns to protect their drug trade isn't at all any different than moonshiners having guns to protect their whiskey. So that seems, when you put it in that context, it sounds wholly American.
Yeah, no, I mean, the legacy and history of this goes far back, and I think the symptoms of, like I said, the guns being used in the way they are, sometimes very inappropriately, not for self-defense or for rights, but for to harm others, is a symptom of a bigger cultural issue and sociological issue. And this country is so rife with those. No, I think that's the big problem for me, at least, is that in the U.S. In general, we're not willing to really face the realities of our history very well. And there's 300 plus years of pretty horrific things to face. Doesn't mean necessarily a specific answer, but just facing them at all and accepting that the reasons this country is what it is, some ways good and in many ways not good, but based on those historic events, to ignore them is to completely put the current situation we're in some strange vacuum without any actual reference as to why it is the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I think there's definitely a clash between gun control advocates versus gun communities like yours, where it is largely, the community comes together around sporting events, and it seems really incongruent to say, how can this thing that I just enjoy as an activity on the weekends with my friends be something to criminalize? But that's a lot different than the reasons that gun control advocates are asking for gun control.
Sure,
it seems like they're kind of talking past each other.
Oh, I think there's a lot of that, and that's another reason when it comes to so much legislative process and regulatory controls from the government, regardless of the topic. In fact, you brought up, for example, drug trade, but firearms, hacking, the hacking community. The people making the laws or pushing for the laws very often fundamentally don't even understand the topic that they're concerned about. They're just concerned about a thing. And so we must fix the thing. But without understanding the thing and being part of the thing, you're more likely to put in some very strange thing that has no actual effect, or worse, than actually making any difference that matters. And we've seen that historically with so many topics. And the firearms, the concept of gun control, and I put that in quotes, has been either very often the laws are based out of complete ignorance, or quite frankly, based out of racism or bigotry. Some of the most basic firearms controls in California only got enacted after the Black Panthers marched with firearms, even though white people had been doing things like that and intimidating people for years before. But when the Black Panthers did it, things have to change. And the history of a lot of our gun control does come from those roots.
I think some of that that's a media problem too, in that the only kinds of legislation that get attention are flashy things that make a big change. So there's this push to regulate in a way that, okay, we're just going to ban this. That people want a simple solution and not some 200-page document talking about how we're going to appropriate funding to schools for, training or something like that. Nobody wants to hear that. And particularly gun culture being very libertarian, there is that kind of reactionary, let's not spend federal dollars on training people to know how to be around guns, because that would be government spending, and we're all opposed to that all the time in the libertarian community. So, there's never been that that solution put forward in a way that I think could be, structurally put into law.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's like we see this with. So one of the problems that exist with firearms is just not even understanding how to use them, and of course, horrible accidents that occur just by the very presence of them by people that don't know how to handle them properly. Now, that's obviously not the thing you see on the news all the time. What we see on the news are more horrific events like, drive-by shootings, or for that matter, spree shootings, which are something that this country has a particular problem with, and also has sociological reasons, but we could probably get there. But when it comes to, for example, just the basic understanding of how to be safe around a gun, if like I said earlier, one of the principles that we seem to be unwilling to accept, especially from the oppositional side, is the idea that they've got this panacea idea that they're just going to get rid of these things. And I stand by the stance that you're not, not in this country. And even if you were to make a law that made every gun in this country illegal, the numbers of them that exist here and the kind of resistance that would occur would make it not feasible possibly to enforce. It would happen anyway. They'd be here. There's more of them than human beings. And so you're not getting rid of them. So if we go with the premise, if we're willing to at least come to the table with, all right, we can't get rid of them, now what? One simple basic thing that makes a ton of sense is just saying an educational system that includes basic firearm safety. If you live in a culture that has guns everywhere, even if you yourself are against them or don't want them, just understanding how to be safe around one goes a long way in a place where you're probably going to land up being around one someday.
I'm sure that, addressing issues with the healthcare system would go a long way too. I think that one of the things I was thinking last night while I was getting ready for this was, I understand that there are people who really enjoy guns and enjoy having lots of guns, but there's a part of my brain that says, if you have been conditioned to think that you need to have a gun on you at all times in order to feel safe, maybe buy a few fewer guns and consider some therapy, because you really shouldn't have to be that afraid of your fellow Americans.
I'm going to counter that to one degree, and I think that I wish that was the case, and I agree with you on to a certain degree. And therapy is probably good for all of us in many ways.
I mean, I'm not saying that's for everyone, but there are definitely people who carry because they feel perpetually afraid of everyone around them, and I don't think that's.
Oh yeah, no. Well, there's been Hunter Thompson wrote a book called Kingdom of Fear, right? This country being a kingdom of fear, and he wasn't wrong. Fear sells. Fear is a marketing tactic. It's one of the methods that has been used by the firearms industry to sell firearms for a long time. But at the same time, there are people who are in those situations, and I'm not trying to. I understand what you're saying, but like, there are people in those situations at their local gay bar or LGBTQ hangout or drag show that I think we've proven they actually do need them. And that's a real threat is being placed against them. And so it depends on your identity and who you are as a person. But I know people in my world, especially people that are in my circles, that I wouldn't want. It's sad that it's the case, but I think it probably is wise for them to be armed, for the very nature of them being who they are has put a target on their head.
Okay, so let's turn to something a little more fun. You are developing a new competition model.
Talking about Deadeye?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is something I'm personally...
Because I watched some video, and it does look fun, I'm not going to lie.
Oh, this is something I'm very passionate about. So my events that I run are called brutality events, and what they are is a mixture of shooting and physical competition. So there'll be a lot more running or movement or even jumping over walls or under barricades or shooting them from around things or even moving weights. It's meant to be like doing safe shooting in a competitive environment, but with physical challenges mixed in. And it makes it just more interesting and fun and also more practical. But I've also been a long-term competitor and love what's called traditional cowboy action shooting. Cowboy action shooting really has almost no physicality. You shoot two handguns. We're talking about guns that were the old west, like single action Colts and lever actions and double barrel coach guns. We're talking 1870s, 1880s kind of stuff. And cowboy action shooting traditionally is very fast-paced drag race match where you stand in one position, shoot two handguns in a pattern, move to the next table, shoot your rifle in a certain pattern, and then finish with your shotgun. And it's really fun. It's a great time. Everybody's there is dressed in cowboy gear and just having a good time. And it's one of the most positive shooting environments I've ever been in around. But I like this mix of what we do at brutality events where you're running and shooting and shooting on the move. And so I'm taking the cowboy action guns, that period of time, and integrating it into the brutality events, calling it Deadeye. And so you'll shoot like a single action army and an 1873 Winchester and a shotgun, but you'll be doing it in a course of fire that requires like shooting on the move or running down range or moving, all the things that we do normally, but with more practicality involved. So it's physical cowboy action shooting.
What was it that made you come up with it? Did you?
The fact that I wanted, well, what really made me come up with that is I love that period of time. I love the history for all the good and the bad. I love the firearms. The firearms of that period of time are particularly elegant. If you're interested in mechanics or mechanical devices or firearms at all, the firearms of the Old West, we're talking end of the U.S. Civil War to like 1900, is a time of wild innovation and development and weird ideas and cool ideas and making things better. And the guns were a mix of becoming increasingly more practical and functional, but still retained aesthetic. And for it's a weird word to use, but beautiful qualities, nice wood, like bluing. They're really aesthetically pretty things. And so, and unlike now where everything is kind of dark black metal and plastic. And so, that weird intersectionality when things weren't quite figured out yet, and now where things are modern, presents an interesting challenge with shooting the guns. Like your lever gun is you have to cycle the lever every time you fire a round, or your wheel gun only has 5 rounds in it. But so it impairs you to have, implies that you must have much more accuracy and dedication to what you're doing when you're trying to hit the targets. But it also brings back using these aesthetic, beautiful weapons. They are weapons, but beautiful weapons in a fun way that gets away also from some of the tactical stuff. So what I mean by that is so much modern shooting is tactically focused. Like, what's the most thing? If you're a CQB guy kicking in doors in Iraq, all right, that is one type of shooting and that is one type of training, and those guns have their purpose. But when you go back to like the 1870s and 1880s, while those were like the weapons of their day, and you shoot them now, I'm not going to say it harkens back to a better time because it wasn't a better time, but it does take out the tactical part out and makes it more about the fun again.
Cool.
And so, yeah, and you can come out there and you can, if you want to dress up, you can put on your cowboy hat and actually put on historically accurate clothes or not. We don't really enforce that, but we enforce the rules to use firearms that were designed before 1898 and manually operated. And it changes the game. Like I said, it takes your brain away from all the tactical, all the modernity of the firearms community kind of like fades away into the background. And it's just more about having fun and shooting the guns and having a good time with one another with this really American pastime. And that's something I'm excited about. I want to push Deadeye forward. I don't want it to replace current cowboy shooting. I think current cowboy shooting is great, and it provides an opportunity for people who couldn't necessarily sprint 100 yards on the clock and shoot a gun or don't want to. But we want to do some of that too. So I think we can provide something that's additional too. We're also augmenting this with something called Roaring 20s, which opens it up past the 1900s and is the Prohibition period. So at my match in West Virginia that's coming up later this year, I'm going to be shooting in Roaring 20s, and I'm going to be in a zoot suit and have a Thompson and an old shotgun, and it's like harkens back to another period of really was still kind of the Old West, but in the 20s, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting, when you talk about the 20s, when we talk about, urban gun violence today, it's not like it didn't exist back then.
Oh, yeah,
the entire mob culture of the 20s was rife with gun violence too. So to say that it's a new problem isn't exactly accurate. There's more people now. The demographics.
That's an interesting point. You're right, absolutely right. And I'm not trying to say like the Roaring Twenties division that we're shooting and doesn't not evoke that. In fact, when you wear a zoot suit, you're sort of talking about gangsters and prohibition like alcohol runners, right? Bootleggers. But and it did happen, and a lot of the laws, there were laws brought in because of that. During 1934 was the National Gun Control Act, which is what started really regulating machine guns, for example. Before 1934, you could buy a machine gun and have it delivered in your mail, like literally to your front door. And yeah, no. But what's interesting is, again, the sociological parts are kind of left out, not from you, but in the conversation. This isn't to justify any of the violence that these mobsters or gangsters were doing, because it's not justifiable. But let's also look at what the government was doing, which wasn't also justifiable, and regulating something that was a very popular thing, alcohol.
Well, there's an odd, economically disenfranchised quasi-racial element to that too. It wasn't African Americans, but it was the Italians, it was the Irish, it was these disenfranchised immigrant community groups that were starting those crime endeavors. Anyway,
yeah, well, sure, but those crime endeavors were also inspired by the government regulating something that maybe shouldn't have been regulated in the first place. People having bodily autonomy and the decision to do what they want with their bodies, and alcohol consumption turned out to be wildly unpopular. And it didn't last very long, right? But it did inspire a hell of a lot of violence. And I would argue that a lot of the current laws and the drug war, in air quotes, has inspired a lot of violence. And you see that not only in the United States, but with cartels in Mexico and across the world.
Yeah, criminalizing addiction doesn't really work very well.
Versus treating it and acting like it's actually just part of the human condition, right?
Yeah, well, but then we're back to fixing the healthcare system.
We are. Exactly. That's the cycle. It's an interesting. So I guess the conversation went full circle there.
Yeah, well, that happens. Okay, so you said you got an event in West Virginia coming up. That sounds fun.
Yep. So we've got actually a couple this year. We've got Utah coming up, which is called CQB Handgun Brutality. It was meant to be mostly a handgun match, but it's actually, we've branched it out and really are pushing the Deadeye division there with the cowboy guns. Like the old West guns don't, like a lever gun doesn't shoot as far as like a modern AR, for example, in terms of ease. So matches that have closer range targets are more aligned with the Deadeye. So we're doing Deadeye there. And then later in the year, we've got Woodland Brutality, which is the West Virginia one. And the same time as Woodland, at night, we're running Midnight Brutality, which is an opportunity for people to bring out night vision and actually shoot with night vision and lasers. So at the same match during the day, you might be shooting Deadeye with cowboy guns, and then at night you're shooting with night vision and lasers. Talk about time travel. And then later in the year, we've got High Desert, which is out in Idaho, and that's our mostly longer range focused rifle target shooting match. That's where we'll have targets out to even as far as 500 yards.
All right. So, well, since this is on YouTube, what do you got coming up on InRange?
I've got actually I don't know when this is going to release, when you're going to drop this, but
2 weeks ish.
Okay, this should be out by the time this comes out. Then I have been working on a collaborative project with my friend Andy of Autun Shea Films, and him and I have done a number of collaborations in the past, and we're dropping it. I think it's going to go the next week, so it should be out the week before this comes out. A big effort on John Brown and Bleeding Kansas, the Battle of Harper's Ferry, and the beginnings of what became the U.S. Civil War. So him and I traveled all the way to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. We filmed on site where these things happened. And I've got a video on my channel coming out simultaneous to the one on his channel. Mine is about Bleeding Kansas, John Brown and the abolitionists and their weapon, which was the Sharps carbine. And his video is Harper's Ferry raid and the repercussions of that. So I'm very excited about this. We put a lot of work into this, and that's like a big video dropping next week.
Excellent. We'll go check that out. Karl, thank you so much, man.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. I was saying one more thing about John Brown.
Go ahead.
And when I was going through the John Brown video, it's like some of these topics are rough because, John Brown was a zealot and rabid abolitionist, and he was right. He's on the right side of history. Like, slavery was violence and was against an entire group of people who were beyond being harmed. I mean, we're talking rape, murder, etc., bred even. And his actions, the videos, if you get to watch them, are really bring back again the sociological element to this, because it's like he was an abolitionist that brought down violence, but so did the pro-slavery phase. And John Brown was, when he was accused of enacting violence, he said, "Well, slavery already is violence. What are you talking about?" And I'm paraphrasing, but he's not wrong. But the videos, when you're doing the research, doing these topics, it brings you back to thinking about some of the things going on then, and how human history repeats itself, because it's not the same. And obviously, we don't have exactly human slavery going on the way we did then in this country. But some of the issues and some of the stuff we see going on now, and some of the things that were going on there with the divisions of culture and law and government, is disturbing, because when you're doing this video, you're like, this looks all too similar to some of the stuff going on right now. And it's very concerning. And so hopefully these videos, which whoever amount of people see them, is a call for a call for rational thought and reason versus where that went, right? And so hopefully we learn from history. But when you're doing this stuff, it can take a toll on you. It's rough stuff sometimes.
Yeah, well, my opinion is, when you look at things like that in the past that are similar to what's going on today, and see that we got through it and things are better today than they were then there's always cause for optimism.
Oh, there's optimism, right? I mean, eventually, through hundreds of thousands of deaths, U.S. slavery as a legal system ended. We just still have a long way to go, and hopefully we can do better without hundreds of thousands of deaths. I guess that's what I meant. Yes, I agree with you. It ultimately did get better. Yes.
Yeah, well, then it's like the saying, people will do the right thing after they've exhausted every other option.
Yeah, that's something that was a quote that showed up on my channel once. Someone said that, and I've loved it. It's like, the U.S. is always going to do the right thing after exhausting every other option. And there does seem to be some truth to that.
Well, Karl, thank you so much. Everybody go check out InRange if you haven't seen it. It's a good channel. He's been doing this a long time.
Appreciate it. Yep. Inrange.TV. And if you're interested in joining us at matches, you can find us at brutalitymatches.org.
Thanks, man. Oh, hey, just for you.
Yeah. Both death whistles are fun.